Have you ever noticed in movies and television shows, they're filled with things they call Easter eggs? You don't know what that is? An Easter egg. An Easter egg, it's details hidden in the story. And if you're paying attention, then what happens is you're able to connect what you're watching or reading to something else, to another movie, to another thing. And most people miss it the first time through, but once you see them, you can't unsee them. The Bible is filled with details like that. There are names and places and genealogies and conversations and small decisions that seem almost incidental, but they are not there by accident. They invite us to slow down, pay attention, because they connect the story we're reading to a much bigger story. Here, you heard Mike read through part of the story of Mordecai and Esther. On the surface, it seems to just be about family, right? This guy, he adopts this cousin and they become family. And it's interesting. And when we read the scriptures, typically from our current context. And so we read it, but we start thinking about it in this time as opposed to that time. And if we're not careful, we'll miss the jewels that the author has laid out, the Easter eggs that the author has laid out in the text. Like, it makes me had some questions as I was reading, like, why is Mordecai identified as a Benjamite? And why does that matter? Why mention that he is a descendant of Kish? Or that his family was taken into captivity? Like, he hadn't read it yet, but who is Haman the Agagite? See, the Hebrews authors cleverly wrote the text with biblical Easter eggs. For example, Mordecai lived roughly 500 years after Saul. And yet the author gives us details that invites us to remember Saul's story. You know, Saul's father was Kish. Not the same Kish, but the author's trying to get you to look back at it. Saul was commanded to destroy the Amalekites and didn't. Remember, he spared King Agag, from which we get the Agites. And this is the beautiful thing written, because it's not just Mordecai versus Haman, but it's the continuation of a story that began generations earlier. One generation's compromise has become another generation's conflict. What Saul compromised, now the children of Israel are having to deal with because they're in captivity in Babylon because of it. But here's the other part of that. One generation's faithfulness can become another generation's blessing. Amen. Oh, man. See, and then those little details become something more than just Easter eggs. They become what I want to call sacred breadcrumbs. Sacred breadcrumbs. When we follow them, they don't simply connect one Bible story to another. They reveal the faithfulness of God that has been woven through the story all along. The Bible doesn't hide Easter eggs so we can admire the writers, because that's why they put the Easter eggs in the movies and stuff, so you can go, look at how clever they were. No, that's not what God is up to here. What happens is the author and God leaves sacred breadcrumbs so we can trust the author and finisher of our faith. And the clues in our story today aren't ultimately about literary brilliance. They're about divine providence. Every breadcrumb, whether it's Kish or Agagite, or an orphan or a sleepless king, or is another reminder that God has been writing one story from the beginning. And if you aren't careful, you'll get so caught up in Esther's courage, because we remember this part of Esther. It says, well, maybe you have been called for such a time as. Yeah, you see, you're familiar, right? If we're not careful, we will overlook Mordecai's quiet faithfulness. Can we talk about Brother Mordecai today? Let's talk about him. Let's talk about him. See, and if we overlook Mordecai's faithfulness, then we will miss the sacred breadcrumbs that reveal God's faithfulness all along. In Esther, I want to read it again for you, because I want to make sure. Let's look at chapter 2, verse 5 again. It says, now there was a Jew, I'm reading from the Common English, a Jew in the fortified part of Susa, whose name was Mordecai, Jair's son. He came from the family line of Shimei and Kish. He was a Benjamite. Benjamites had been taken into exile away from Jerusalem along with the group, which included Judah's king Jeconiah from Babylon's king Nebuchadnezzar, exiled in Babylon. And Mordecai had been a father to Hadassah, that is Esther, though she was really his cousin because she had neither father nor mother. The girl had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. When her parents died, Mordecai had taken her to be his daughter. And so when the king's order, and his new law became public, let me tell you what that was. See, the king threw a party, like a big party, like 180 days party. Like that's a party, y'all. Drink all the stuff you want, eat all the food you want. Like we just going in for 90 days, 3 months rather. We are at it. Okay, we are at it. No, I'm sorry, 6 months. 180 days, that's 6 months, ain't it? That's 6 months. 6-month party, y'all. While he's drunk, he says he wants his queen Vashti to come and show her beauty to his guests. And Vashti's like, ain't nobody got time for that. I'm just like, that's my translation. Vashti's like, no, ain't nobody coming out there. You all drunk, you want me to parade in front of these folks? I ain't coming, no. And so his officials said to him, King, listen, if she don't come, then all the women in the kingdom will stop listening to their husbands. That's going to be a problem, sir. And so they convince him to get another queen. That's where we pick up in the story here. They say, you know what? Vashti, you're no longer queen. I'm going to pick another one. And so here it is. And so when the king's order and his new law became public, many young women were gathered into the fortified part of Susa under the care of Hegai. Esther was also taken to the palace to the care of Hegai, the one in charge of the women. Like that was his job, to help take care of the women who were being prepared to be presented to the king. The young women pleased him and won his kindness, and he quickly began her beauty treatments and gave her carefully chosen foods. He also gave her 7 servants selected from among the palace servants and moved her and her servants into the nicest rooms in the women's house. Esther hadn't told anyone her race and family background because Mordecai had ordered her not to. So at this point, everybody thinks that she's Babylonian. That's important. That's an important detail. And each day found Mordecai pacing back and forth along the wall in front of the women's house to learn how Esther was doing and what they were doing with her. Okay? So, the first thing that we're told about Mordecai is not his accomplishments, right? We're not told about his influence. It's not even about Esther. But what we're told is this: he's a Benjamite. He's a descendant of Kish. He's part of a family that was exiled. And the author is already inviting us to remember about how God is writing a story much bigger than Mordecai himself. These details are important, but then it feels like the camera zooms in and says he had a cousin named Hadassah. Now, that's interesting. You look at those and you go, okay, Esther, Hadassah. Esther was her Persian name. Hadassah is her Hebrew name. And so it makes you wonder, like, why didn't the authors make it the Book of Hadassah? See, I told you, don't be reading this stuff casually. You got to be thinking about it. But this is not the first time that we have seen the Babylonians change people's names. You remember Daniel, Belteshazzar, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those were their Persian names. Their Hebrew names was Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But we always tell the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It is interesting and it's also interesting what the Bible doesn't tell us about Mordecai. It doesn't tell us whether Mordecai was married. It doesn't tell us or mention his wife. It doesn't mention if he had other children. It doesn't even tell us whether Esther was related to him through his father or through her mother. Like, which one of them was his siblings? We don't know. The text is very quiet about these things because those aren't the details the author wants us to pay attention to. He wants us to remember one thing. When a girl lost both her parents, Mordecai stepped in. Okay. He didn't have to. There was no command from heaven. There's no angel that appears. There's no prophet that gave instructions. They didn't say, hey, listen, I need you to take care of this young girl because she's going to become queen one day. There was none of that. He simply did the next faithful thing. Her parents are dead. She needs covering. I'm going to cover her. And they became family. And it makes me wonder also, where did he learn this kind of faithfulness? Like, again, we don't have those details. The text doesn't tell us that maybe he learned it from his parents, maybe from his grandparents, maybe from sitting around Sabbath tables with other Jews or other Israelites, maybe from hearing the stories of Abraham and Moses and David. He was familiar with them. I mean, we don't know, but here's what we do know. Faithfulness had become a part of who he was long before the important steps in this story. Because later, when the crisis comes, Mordecai doesn't suddenly become more faithful. He already is. Are you paying attention? Do you hear what I'm telling you about Mordecai? Mordecai's faithfulness doesn't just show up in the big moments. This is how God works. We tend to imagine God preparing us for with dramatic moments, the big things. But the Bible often shows him preparing people with ordinary moments. Yeah. Before Joseph governed Egypt, he learned to faithfully manage Potiphar's house. But before David wore a crown, he faithfully watched sheep. But before Esther wore a crown, someone faithfully raised her as an orphan. And maybe this is where some of us are today. We are waiting for the big moments when God has us in the ordinary moments. We're asking God for influence. He's teaching us faithfulness. We're praying for bigger opportunities, and he's pointing us to the people already sitting at the table with us. The next faithful thing is almost never far away. It's usually right in front of us. Here's what I think is the sacred breadcrumb here. Looking back, we know Esther becomes queen. But Mordecai didn't know he was raising the queen. When we look back, we know she saves the people of Israel. Mordecai had no idea. Looking back, we know that God is quietly positioning her to be a deliverer of the people. Mordecai had no clue that those things were going to happen. All he knew is this: a little girl needed a family. He was faithful to write what was in front of him. Providence. See, the greatest opportunities for faithfulness are usually disguised as ordinary responsibilities. You think you are doing something that is just the right thing to do in that moment. And you have no idea that it's pointing to something much bigger down the line. He didn't read it, but I want to read this section of Esther to you. Is it all right if we read today? Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Chapter 2, verse 21 says this. At that time, as Mordecai continued to work at the king's gate, two royal eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, became angry with King. This is how you say this word. It looks like a dinosaur name. It's Ahasuerus. It's Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus. Right? Yeah. No, I'm going to tell you. Hold on, hang tight. Your version may have the word Xerxes. Xerxes. Okay? So he has those two names. And y'all, I was telling folks earlier, this is the same Xerxes from the movie 300. It's the same King Xerxes who was fighting the Spartans, the Greeks. This is that same king, okay? They were among the guards protecting the doorway to the king, but they secretly planned to kill him. And when Mordecai got wind of it, he reported it to Queen Esther. She spoke to the king about it, saying the information came from Mordecai. The matter was investigated and found to be true, so the two men were impaled. That means they cut their heads off and put their heads on stakes and hung them up in the middle of the town, right, on pointed poles. A report about the event was written in the royal record with the king present. The end. Now, anybody else find that strange? Right? How did Mordecai hear this stuff? He heard it. He was close enough to hear what was going on. He reported it to Esther, and she reported it to the king. The king had the men killed, and that was the end of it. Nobody said anything to Mordecai. So if the first breadcrumb is his compassion for Esther, the second breadcrumb here is integrity. One day, while he's sitting at the king's gate, he overhears officials plotting to assassinate the king. I mean, think about this. This is the king whose empire is holding Mordecai's people in exile. It's not King David or King Hezekiah or Hosea. This is the Persian king Xerxes. And Mordecai could have looked the other way. He could have convinced himself, they ain't none of my business. I mean, if they want to kill him, let them kill him. We in captivity now. Let them have him. What? He could have thought, let somebody else handle it. I'm sure I wasn't the only one. Instead, he tells Esther, who is now queen. And Esther tells the king, and the conspiracy is uncovered, and the king's life is spared. And then this verse just says, a report about the event was written in the royal record with the king present. That's it. No ceremony, no medal, no promotion, no public thank you. Just a line in a government record. How? Interesting. Years pass and nothing happens. Imagine how easy it would have been for Mordecai to become cynical. Why bother? I mean, nobody notices. Nobody appreciates what I do. I mean, what's the point? But the remarkable thing about Mordecai is this: the silence never changes his faithfulness. See, most people can be faithful when faithfulness is rewarded. The real test comes when it isn't. Faithfulness that depends on recognition isn't really faithfulness. It's a transaction. Mordecai wasn't making transactions. He wasn't serving for applause. He was serving from a conviction. He chose what was right simply because it was right. That's why faithfulness chooses what is right before it knows why it matters. Oh, see, when I'm being faithful, I'm choosing what is right, even when I don't understand why it's going to matter later. I'm just doing what's right because it's right. I wonder how many of us feel forgotten. I mean, maybe you've taught children, or you've changed diapers, or you've cared for aging parents, you've volunteered, you've prayed, you've served, you've given, and sometimes you've wondered, did any of it matter? The Book of Esther is whispering to you, yes, it does matter. Not because people will always remember, but because God does. My God. People may not remember, but God does. In chapter 6, right? In chapter 6, he read it. The king can't sleep. He can't sleep. He is troubled. He's got insomnia. And all of the books in the palace, the chronicles are opened, and all of the entries, and they're all just reading the entries that are in there. And Mordecai's name is spoken. Yo, this is years later. Not coincidence. This was providence. The forgotten record had never been forgotten by God. And this is not to say to you that every faithful person will eventually receive public recognition. But Mordecai did. Many faithful believers never do, but if we imply otherwise, we unintentionally preach a prosperity version of faithfulness. It's not what we're doing. The real promise is deeper. God, his providence is not dependent upon human recognition. His ability and his willingness and the work that he's doing to make things come to pass is not based on whether or not we get recognized. Whether anyone else remembers is almost beside the point. God never lost the record. That's why the breadcrumb isn't pointing to Mordecai. It's pointing toward the God who quietly keeps every act of faithfulness within his sight. Go back and read the Book of Esther. Just go back and read. It's so interesting. This Mordecai, the conspiracy is uncovered, the king's life spared, his act is forgotten, and then suddenly something happens here. And if you notice, throughout the Book of Esther, not once does it say, and God said. Not once does it say, and the prophet came and declared. Not once does it say, the angel of the Lord from heaven came down and spoke to Mordecai or spoke to Esther. Not once in this book does it say that. Yet God's fingerprints are everywhere in this chapter. Everywhere in this book, everywhere you look, you see God's hand at work. He is faithfully writing all along. No, Mordecai, he never read this book of Esther. He never knew his life would become part of Scripture. He never knew believers would gather thousands of years later to read about an orphan he raised. He never knew that one quiet decision to do the right thing would strengthen the faith of generations he would never meet. Never knew that. He simply did the next faithful thing. God wrote the story. And perhaps that's one of the hardest truths for us to accept. We often hope that one day everything in our lives will finally make sense. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. I mean, Abraham never saw the nation God promised. David never saw the Messiah reign. Peter never saw the global church. And Mordecai never knew how many people his ordinary faithfulness would encourage. Yet none of them lived in vain. And none of us are living in vain, because faithfulness has never depended on seeing the ending. It's always been dependent on trusting the author, capital A. That's why Christ doesn't ask us to understand the whole story. He asks us to be faithful with today's page. And so every quiet prayer, every difficult conversation, every act of forgiveness, every child you teach, every neighbor you love, every sacrifice no one else sees becomes a part of the story whose impact reaches people you will never meet. I mean, if you're wondering whether or not your life matters, it does. If you're wondering, getting up every day and going to that job and doing those things and interacting with those people, if you're ever wondering whether or not those things matter, they do. See, our lives are becoming sacred breadcrumbs. Not because we intend to leave the breadcrumbs, but because God faithfully weaves ordinary obedience into his extraordinary story, so that, not so that people remember us, but so that they will recognize him. Because that's what sacred breadcrumbs do. They don't point to the person, they point to the one who has been leading all along. As we've walked through Mordecai's story today, I'm hoping that you've noticed something. That this sermon was never really about Mordecai. It's always been about the God who was faithfully working through Mordecai. The Bible is filled, y'all, with sacred breadcrumbs. Abraham leaves home. Joseph sold to his brother. Ruth refuses to leave Naomi. David watches. See, Mordecai adopts an orphan. Peter leaves his nets. None of them knew how God was using their ordinary faithfulness. None of them understood the full story while they were living it. Yet today, we read their stories and recognize what they could not always see: the faithfulness of God. Every sacred breadcrumb points beyond itself, not to the people, but to the God who has always been faithful. And then every breadcrumb leads us then to Jesus Christ. He is not simply another person in the story. Every promise finds its yes in him. Every act of faithfulness ultimately points to the one who was perfectly faithful. He was faithful in obscurity, faithful in compassion, faithful in integrity, faithful in suffering, faithful in obedience, faithful unto death, and faithful enough to rise again so that all who trust in him might have life. Because of Jesus, we know something Mordecai never knew. The author has already secured a victory in the ending. That means we are free to stop chasing extraordinary moments and simply live extraordinary faithfulness. Some of you are waiting for God to show up and show you the whole story. You're waiting for it. He may not. You might be wondering whether your quiet acts of obedience really matter. They do. And some of you are carrying responsibility that no one else seems to notice. Can I tell you something? Keep doing that faithful thing. Just keep doing it. You may never know how God is weaving your life into his story. You may never meet the people whose faith will one day be strengthened because of your ordinary obedience. But that has never been your responsibility. Your responsibility is just to do the next faithful thing today. Our lives become sacred breadcrumbs, not because we set to leave them, but because God is faithfully weaving our obedience into his extraordinary purposes. And one day, someone may look back over your life and not simply remember what you did, but they may recognize how faithful God has always been. I don't know about you, but that's my hope. Our humanity loves the recognition, loves the fame, loves that attention. But really, deep down in my soul, what I really want is I really want somebody to look back over my life and find their way to Christ because I was faithful over the ordinary thing. So today, I want to invite you to respond. Not to Mordecai, but to Christ. Perhaps you've never trusted the author of the story with your own life. I don't know. You've been trying to write the next chapter yourself. You've carried the burden of trying to control every outcome. Today, Jesus invites you to surrender to him. To trust the one who is faithful. Or perhaps you've been discouraged. You've served, you've prayed, you've loved, you've forgiven, you've remained faithful, and it feels as though no one has noticed. Hear the word of the Lord today. God has not forgotten. He never loses the record. Or perhaps you've been waiting for a bigger assignment while overlooking the faithful thing already in front of you. The next conversation, the next act of kindness, the next opportunity to forgive, the next step of obedience. Maybe Christ isn't asking you to do something spectacular. Maybe he's simply asking you to do the next faithful thing. And so today, if you want to place your trust in Jesus, if you need renewed strength to remain faithful, if today you want to surrender tomorrow's story and faithfully live in today, I invite you to make your place an altar so that we can trust the author together. Let's pray. Father, thank you for reminding us today that you are always at work, even when we cannot see the whole story. Thank you for the sacred breadcrumbs you have left throughout your word that continually point us to your faithfulness.